Konnichiwa. Ohayo gozaimasu. Welcome to today's Naruse a Day review. And today we are jumping back in time a little bit to consider a film from the late 1930s that in some ways is quite distinctive and singular in Naruse's career, but one in which there is real interest because of a kind of experimental approach to visual storytelling, something that is common in several Naruse films of this period, but one in which he applies this experimental style to material that he would go on to rework and refine in subsequent decades. This is a film called Avalanche, made in 1937. It is defiantly not a Japanese version of or response to the then internationally popular and acclaimed Berg film or mountain film that, through the work of Leni Riefenstahl, was becoming visible around the world. It is rather a romantic triangle drama film. It's a film about a struggling marriage, a film that, despite featuring fairly wealthy characters in palatial homes and sun-kissed holiday resorts, is actually quite gloomy. It's about fractured and fractious interiority, and indeed it is this fractious interiority, this emphasis on turbulent emotions and feelings, that Naruse experiments with, trying to find visual means of communicating. It's a film that Naruse provided solely by himself the script for, which is very unusual in his career. And perhaps this is why the film has some issues, despite its bold and in some ways inventive visual style. And I'll say a little bit more about that subsequently. So I said that it's a drama about a romantic triangle. At the centre is a struggling marriage. Now, this is certainly something that Naruse would go on to detail and explore in some key 1950s works that I've already reviewed, like Sudden Rain and like Repast. Here, there is a sense that the male is the protagonist rather than the female. As we start the film, the marriage, again like Sudden Rain or Repast, is already struggling. It is actually a relationship that is almost on its last legs already at this point. It's the husband who is the disaffected party, the husband who is in the process of conducting a kind of affair with his cousin. His wife, although she intuits something of his disaffection, she is unaware of said affair, and her desire to keep the relationship alive leads to her almost willfully misreading or ignoring completely the signals of disaffection that her husband sends out rather forthrightly. Now, I said that this is a problematic film in some ways, and I think the fact that Naruse is the sole credited scriptwriter cannot be discounted as one of the key reasons for this. On the surface, at least, this is quite a verbose, talky, almost didactic script where characters state very boldly what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And Naruse doesn't really dramatize this very well. Indeed, I think the experimental nature of the film is drawn, at least in part, from Naruse's refusal to even try to dramatize the tensions, the emotional turbulence of his protagonists. So instead, he develops here a sort of visual way of addressing how characters are feeling. So we get something throughout, largely only pertaining to the male protagonist's feelings, the husband's feelings, where we get a kind of interior monologue or a stream of consciousness. But Naruse changes the visual register through a sort of semi-wipe where the screen becomes darker, where the look of the film visibly darkens every time he goes from talking to others to, in effect, talking to us, although he is talking to himself. It's perhaps something that Naruse developed as a way of cinematizing a theatrical paradigm, the sense of the monologue that is familiar, for instance, from Shakespeare plays, where we would get characters, as it were, breaking out of the world of the film to talk to the audience. This is something that quite unusual in Japanese cinema, quite unusual in present day modern stories in any cinema, I think. And it gives the film, despite the awkwardness and verboseness of the script, it gives it a kind of interesting liminality where a gap opens up between what is cinematic and what is theatrical. So there is in Avalanche, I think, a kind of liminality. The film inhabits this sort of textual no man's land between cinema and theatre. And I think the reasons for this primarily lie with Naruse's desire to encourage us to think about representational systems, to think about how cinema on the one hand and theatre on the other represent, how they depict, how they in effect work to mobilize our engagement with characters, which in the case of this particular film comes down to mobilizing an engagement with gender identification, with the arguments put forward by the male protagonist as to why he is dissatisfied with his marriage, which he does put forward principally to his father, who strongly rebuts those arguments and demands that his son follow through with the responsibilities that he has undertaken in marrying the woman that he has, and the various women, the two key women, one of whom is devoted to her husband, and the other is clearly interested in and attracted to her cousin. However, the latter is circumspect, to say the least, about her developing relationship with the male protagonist. She, despite her clear attraction to him, she does not want to be part of an adulterous relationship, and she wants to feel good about herself. Her conscience nags her, and she wants to spend more time looking after and being with her disabled brother. There is in this another triangular relationship. So we have one man and two women, and connected by the cousin of the male protagonist is one woman torn between two different men. So there is a kind of diagrammatic clarity to a series of relationships and how the different characters relate to each other on an interpersonal level here. There is also the fact that where diagrammatic clarity is concerned, the aforementioned father and his objection to his son's adultery, his rejection of his son's behaviour comes down to the fact that he feels his son is a coward, that he has committed to a woman, and whatever his feelings, he should see through his responsibilities, whatever his own personal, emotional, sexual proclivities may be. His son claims that this is not cowardly, that backing out of this marriage is not cowardly, that he should not submit blindly to a relationship that he is no longer committed to, and that he should be free to follow his own feelings, that to not do this would not only be sort of renouncement of his own masculinity, but would also be unfair on his wife, because he would, by definition, make her life miserable. He would, whatever his wishes were, make her life miserable. And indeed, he is doing that, because we see that she is tied to the house in which she lives. She very rarely ventures out. She pines for her husband when he's not there, pines for ways to make him happy that he, by and large, neglects or doesn't recognise, and seeks only to devote herself to him. So, verbose as it may be, and guilty certainly of putting sort of thematic, political indeed, positions foursquare in the mouths of its protagonists. Nonetheless, there is a fascinating dialectic here, the dialogue between duty and responsibility versus personal inclination. This is something that animates a lot of Japanese cinema, a lot of Japanese genre cinema. Samurai films, Yakuza films in particular, are animated by this binarism. It's usually referred to as the Giri versus Ninjo conflict. The idea that protagonists are torn between duty, loyalty on the one hand, and personal proclivity on the other. And this is something that is writ large in this film. It's given an extra sort of frisson, an extra charge in the fact that the film was made in 1937 at a time when Japan was engaging in the Sino-Japanese conflict. The militaristic government was ramping up the war machine, and we were only 3-4 years away from Japan's entry into World War II, when duty to one's nation was ordered, was expected to supersede any and all personal feelings or inclinations. And putting these sort of social and political views in the mouths of characters who are arguing through domestic marital strifes and tensions gives a really interesting sort of extra dimension to this politicized discourse and debate. And Naruse, typically for this director, does not sort of valorize one side against the other. I think he really does step back and allow both the male protagonist and his father, who are the main mouthpieces. They form either end of the spectrum here of the Giri versus Ninjo sort of duality. He allows them both to articulate their points of view, and he treats both points of view sympathetically. We see the strengths and the weaknesses of both points of view because of the way that each of these characters treats both the other character involved in this debate and indeed those around them. And the fact that those around them are typically female characters comes back round to reframing this political discourse in terms of gender dynamics and gender imbalances, and the fact that as a patriarchal society, these positions, these ideas, these concepts were promulgated by men and expected to be enacted not just by men but by women as well. So there is quite a subtle and detailed social and political discourse at the heart of this film. So it's less than an hour long. A lot of Naruse's films around this time were essentially short films or long short films. Forgive the contradiction in terms. So it's well worth watching. As I said, far from Naruse's best. A film that shows up his limitations as a scriptwriter, but conversely, these limitations lead to some of his strengths as a director shining through. So definitely worth a watch. Give it a look. See what you think. Let me know what you think, and let's discuss it. Comment down below. Like and subscribe, or don't. Follow me on X at AdamBingham01, and look out in the very near future, i.e. tomorrow, for more Naruse-based content. Bye for now.